Hello, and welcome to episode 20... No. Hello, and welcome to the Crate and Crowbar. This is episode 111, and it's the 22nd of September. I'm Tom Francis, and with me here today are...
Marsh Davis.
And...
Graham Smith.
And special guest...
Rich Stanton.
And the news, if you can call it that, is, I guess, just that video games have been on TV a lot lately.
Yeah, and badly.
Weird that things on TV about games would be bad.
Yeah, we've had... it seems to be like it must be the BBC's digital season or something like that, because they put on a whole load of...
It's called Make It Digital.
Which
is their kind of ongoing campaign to encourage people to learn how to code and stuff.
Jesus,
and as part of that, they've commissioned a season of game-related documentaries.
What, to completely shiv that home as hard as they can.
Demonise video games, the people who make them, and the very concept of making them.
Yeah, so I think we've all seen Gamechangers, which was the fictionalised account of Rockstar's... Well, it's not exactly Rockstar's rise to fame. They'd already they put out GTA and GTA 3 at the point where the story picks up. And it's about the post-release of Vice City and the various court cases involving the now disbarred lawyer Jack Thompson.
Yeah, it starts after the release of Vice City, but it's San Andreas where Thompson gets involved and starts doing his thing in a heavily fictionalised and very inaccurate account of what actually went on.
The account of how Rockstar invented the open world game, created the first game with an adaptable hero.
First game with a black lead.
First game with sex in it.
Yeah, all these things. It was kind of very much the flagship program, I think, and I think the reason a lot of people are so disappointed with it is that, or certainly my sense when I saw all these BBC programs announced was, finally we're getting, some real coverage, like not, our game's just bad for you, and one of the programs was actually called that. But it's just disappointing because the standard of the programs in general hasn't been very high, and Gamechangers is the flagship. It's basically a movie, it's 90 minutes long, and, my opinion is it's extraordinarily bad. Anyone disagree with that?
No, I think that's... I think it would... The thing is, obviously, I disagree with... It's obviously hugely inaccurate, and that it comes away... You would come away with it with a very a demented picture of both the process and the repercussions of the release of that game. But even if... even if it had been a complete slam dunk and the release of GTA had literally caused somebody to go out and shoot a bunch of police officers directly, like if the game had actually puppeted them in some way, it would still be probably one of the worst pieces of fiction that I've seen on television in maybe a decade.
Yeah.
I know. It's just excruciatingly bad. From the level of dialogue, the scenes, no purpose in them, no drama in them, just really awful exposition delivered by seemingly idiots.
Did we all watch it all the way through?
I did, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I have to
Me
say
too.
it was a real fucking struggle.
Were you?
More than anything.
That's what I was going to ask, is why did you watch it all the way through? Because I actually found it compelling in the, I sort of couldn't stop watching. I was just fascinated by... I had to know, for each thing that pissed me off about it, I had to know what the next thing that would piss me off about it was.
I was quite interested to see what they did with Thompson, because in a way the inaccuracies in it don't really bother me. You can tell a kind of a narrative version of history that's inaccurate and moves scenes around, and if it's a great story, well done. But in this one, they kind of turn Jack Thompson, who is, a lunatic to the extent, he's basically been disbarred and disowned by anyone that's associated with him in the past. And it makes him into, it does contain extremes of character at points, but generally he's quite likeable. And, he is painted as a kind of moral crusader. And, that's bad enough, but one of the things that really bothered me about it is I didn't really get much sense of GTA in it, and why GTA is a special game, why so many people love GTA, why people would spend hundreds of hours in this game. And the perspective that Thompson and people who argue against GTA have, which is that they're murder simulators where we go around mowing cops, is basically what the show presented. Every time you saw GTA, it was, mowing down people or it was shooting cops. The only other side of it was the RPG side of San Andreas, which they spent a lot of time talking about. I know the reason for that, but it's not it's not really why those games are special, And you left thinking, well, what was the point of that? What was the arc? What was the story? Did they make the game that Houser wanted to make? Did Thompson achieve his goals? And it's like, well, Thompson seemed to be the winner, really. I mean, at the end, his wife basically says,
"You changed the law."
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, you're a good woman, Marjorie," whatever it fucking means.
Yeah, and you've got Hillary Clinton on telly with her stupid law.
I think she says to him, "You're a good man, Jack Thompson," and he says to her, "You're a special lady."
Because at that point, it needed to reiterate that they were man and wife, as they do throughout the entire show when any two brothers are on the screen. Like, "Hey, little brother!"
Hey,
Somebody...
little brother. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I think the thing that annoyed me most was all this. The thing that annoyed us most was that it completely failed to communicate anything about game development, but it kept putting it on screen in a way that suggested it was telling you what game development was like, and it was just Dan Houser having theories and saying them to two people in an office, and then just cut to the next thing.
And what does Sam Houser say? Let's get the programmers down here. Iterate on it.
Talking about a street.
Yeah.
They can really iterate on this street.
At one point, Dan Houser says, "We've got to take it to the next level."
Oh, yeah.
And even if he does talk in those kinds of cliches, if you're writing that, surely, if you've any idea about the games industry, you think, everyone's going to cringe when they hear that. I won't put that line in there.
I'll find
out another idiom for something.
I like the bit where he was ordering an engine like it was a pizza.
Yeah.
He was like, "They're making our engine, are they? I want it bigger. I want it able to do this." Right, boss?
Well, the next scene, they've got a fucking engine.
I know.
It's just... It popped up out of nowhere. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't great. And I don't know. I just terrible disservice. The thing is that story could be really good. Like there is obviously a dramatic story.
Well,
there's lots of interesting
The
personalities.
reason they focus on it is that that's one of the only periods where we really have a lot of documentary stuff about Rockstar, because obviously
Court cases.
Yeah, they're a very closed shop as a company. But because of hot coffee, they were, their emails were taken by the FBI. Lots of them were released in court. So we actually know what was going on during that period. And this is why people focus on it. And hot coffee is a great story because, it is about kind of freedom of expression. It is about why can't games have a sex scene in them when movies do. And, things like the ESRB not understanding that something that is on the disc, with inverted commas, isn't in the game, which is completely true.
Yeah.
And then you have the kind of compounding of it by Rockstar, where like instead of saying that, they just think, these people don't know anything technical. It's not on the disc. Yeah. Rockstar lie and put themselves in deep shit.
But what's so weird about the way that's presented dramatically is it's never explained between the point at which they say we need to cut it out and the point at which it's found to be there. They never explain that they've just redacted it but left it on the disc. That revelation comes afterwards. So at the point where Rockstar are lying and some of the characters are going, why are they doing this? You don't know why. Unless you knew the story already. It's just, I don't know, it's just completely dramatically
It also completely lets Sam Houser off with that, because when you look at the kind of evidence from that period, what is clear is that he didn't take it seriously at all. For a long, long time. He didn't take it seriously until it was much too late. So them getting into such trouble over it is in fact a function of this guy who just believes he's right to such a degree. He doesn't take, society, if you want, seriously. And then when he finally realizes, the FBI are going to come in, it's mea culpa time, but it's too late. And none of this stuff's in the show.
There's such thin glimpses of what Sam Houser is actually like as a person. Yeah. And you can sort of tell that they've tried to piece him together based on the emails he's wrote, like characters remarking, "Oh, you like to swear a lot in your emails, don't you?" And his weird fascination with Don Simpson, the film producer. It's like, there's those two things, and then there's the fact that he likes table tennis. And those are the only three things you really learn about him as a
He's
human
got a
being.
beard.
He does have a beard. But many of us also have beards.
Yeah, I very much doubt Sam House has anything like that presentation. And I don't think it's Radcliffe's fault, I think he's a perfectly good actor. I just,
They're saying some really bad lines as well, and they're making the best of it. I mean, bless them. Heroic,
I
really.
mean, I've never met Sam Houser, but from everything I've read about him and read by him, he seems like a dynamo, dynamo stroke monster. Seems like the kind of guy that if he was in a room, he'd be the centre of attention in that room. And, the kind of general that his troops would, follow to their deaths. And you never got any sense of that. I mean, he struck me as a bit of a whinger, really.
He's quite petulant, but he doesn't exude any kind of power, which I think is probably the difference. Yeah, I think they should have just completely fictionalised it. And gone for the halt and catch fire route. Just set something in a game studio with that kind of drama occurring. Obviously, you got somebody with some talent to write it instead. Yeah.
I would rather that they'd made a film about the story of DMA design and the original inception of Grand Theft Auto. After the show aired, a bunch of the former DMA developers were tweeting during it with their experiences working on the game the first time around. And there's been books written about DMA design and the creation of Lemmings. And if your goal is to inspire people to get involved in programming, then the story of Dave Jones and his friends, who were the part of an amateur coding club in Dundee, and he was a electrical engineer who lost his job at the Timex watch factory and used the $3,000 redundancy pay he got to form DMA design with his friends, and then, programmed a bunch of stuff and released games.
And the first GTA really was a kind of, tone shift for everything.
Yeah.
It was just no one's done that before. That's, kind of amazingly fun and also really grotesque and really dangerous, weird new territory.
Certainly scandalous at the time as well, if they're looking to do that story.
The thing about that story is that, you get a lot of factors coming into it. Obviously there's the rise of the PlayStation itself and what that's doing for games culture, but the scandal around GTA was created deliberately by DMA themselves. They hired the now disgraced Max Clifford, and his job was to get it in the papers. And he is the one that started all this stuff about GTA being a cop killing simulator because, you're in the sun. And this is something that will obviously come back to bite Rockstar later, but when DMA are making it, it's quite innocent in a way. It's quite naive. They just see it as a way to get coverage without paying for it.
That's one of the most insulting things about Gamechangers is that there's no attempt to kind of get into the psychology of the guy Devin, I forget what his surname is, Devin Moore, who killed those 3 cops. And it just breezes over it as though, of course he would.
I thought they tried to present him like CJ, the kind of the mute killer. Basically.
Well, obviously they can't really come down one side or the other, presumably. But the law has, and to present it by they just didn't have any kind of ambiguity about how he was forced to do it. He sits there and you get this montage of him kind of gurning, looking fixedly at a screen while all these images of death flash around him. And you're
and he kind of twitches a little bit.
Yeah, it's just, come on.
The other montage of a person playing a video game is the guy who then discovers the hot coffee stuff on the desk.
Oh, yeah.
And it's he walks into his plush Scandinavian apartment where his girlfriend's on the couch and he's nicely dressed and clean cut. And over the course of the next 30 seconds, he just becomes increasingly disheveled. To the end of it, he's got a half beard, and he's wearing a hoodie, and it's he played this game for a couple of days and his life fell apart.
Was he really mobbed by reporters coming out of his house?
Highly doubted. I imagine that someone in this room emailed him at some point.
Yeah, what a lot of shit. What was one of the other programs I forgot what it's called now. Girls Can Code. Girls Can Code?
I only just saw the tail end of this. I think it was the last part of the last episode of a 3-part series. In which it was 4 or 5 young women who were... It seemed to have almost nothing to do with code. It was just... They all had business ideas and they were just pitching it to investors. And their business ideas... I only caught the tail end of it, so I don't know the full thing, if you ever find out the full thing. But they were bizarre. One of them was a fruit bowl that lights up when you walk past it and can be programmed via an app to say a catchphrase. But nothing about the sort of creation of that was in the bit I saw. And the entire thing I saw was just how to market, how to tailor a pitch to investors to wow them by quoting random stats. and there was a brief snippet of one of the people on it, sort of it just showed them very briefly taking a coding lesson, like just a few clips from that, without you ever seeing them coding. The only program that you saw that was made was a picture of their face bouncing around on screen, like just a little square portrait photo just bouncing around in Unity. And afterwards she said she quite enjoyed it. Then that was it for the coding part of the entire thing, only from what I saw. And she was looking to partner with someone more technical to handle that side of things, I think. And then at the end it said, like they had a conclusion, and it said, so can girls code? Well, some of them can and some of them can't, just like boys. But girls can become leaders in technology or something. And it was alright in the, like, some of them can, some of them can't, and that's the same for men. But then it was like, but what girls should really do is take promotional and marketing positions within the tech industry.
Yeah, it seemed like a show with, that was misnamed. I didn't watch the whole thing. I started watching it and I realised it wasn't about girls that can code. It was, women in the tech industry with ideas, and I just turned it off. I think the name of the show really annoyed me because of the can. There's like a surprise there,
Yeah,
girls can code.
I mean, it was suggesting that the position of the audience is that they would believe otherwise initially, which is the same with the Horizon program. Are video games really that bad? Like, well, how bad do you think that I think they are? Not very bad.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like all those debates around the referendum questions, isn't it? You're already leading your audience regardless of what the program says.
It's a bit of when did you stop beating your wife, isn't it? It's just, I don't know, I mean,
deny fucking a pig.
Yeah, I don't know, just if you take that to any kind of more extreme, you can just see how insulting girls aren't stupid. And why would I think they were? I also watched the Horizon. I've actually made lots of angry notes on it here, but I won't read them all out.
Come on, Marty.
But it was
give us a taste.
Well, I kind of hated Horizon ever since I've watched it. It's a long running TV show on the BBC, which is sort of pop science, glum wank, awful human interest. Bilge presented in the most kind of dire fucking way. Well, the long running jokes in my family is that, for a start, it reliably sends my parents to sleep. Like, for as long as they've ever watched it, they are out within 15 minutes of the start of the program. And it's because it only has, like, a rate of facts of 1 every 6 minutes. And the rest of it is just rhetorical questions and slow motion shots of people walking down streets with a blue filter. And, like, you can actually reliably commit suicide by doing a drinking game based on that accounting, if only you're able to stay awake long enough to actually deal with the drinking. So it's not a great science show, I would say, as a starting basis. But this one, obviously, it's called "Are Video Games Really That Bad?" which is just like a bogus premise for one thing. But to its credit, it's not a totally partisan show. And to begin with, it opens with. I can't remember how many talking heads, but 3 of them are women. I think at least 2 of them I know. And there's a black guy, and then there's Daniel Krupa from IGN, who's white, but you can't have everything. And, what a great way to kind of upset the expectations of an audience who've probably come in thinking, yes, of course games are that bad. And, then they've seen that people who play and make games are in fact these,
presentable young people.
Exactly. And they're all quite articulate, they're all very sensible. Unfortunately, the program doesn't just allow them to talk for 60 minutes, because that would be way better than the presentation of the psychology they put forward. And then, after that, for the maybe 20 to 25 minutes, they just present a series of really duff psychological, studies into games' relationship with violence. And they are, I'm not actually opposed to the idea that games make people violent. Like, if you play a lot of if you saturate yourself in any kind of experience, it's going to have an effect. And the fucking point of any medium is to have an effect. That's why it exists. Like, that's why you cry at a good film or turn the page of a thriller. It's because, and that's why you engage with those things, because you want to have that effect. You want somebody else's ideas to be transmuted into these weird honking noises, then you pull them into your brain, and then they become your own thoughts. Isn't that magical? That's what media is. And to say that games don't have any kind of effect is obviously ludicrous. And obviously, if you have lots of violence, I can imagine you being, more inclined to violent thought. The extent to which that has repercussions in the real world in terms of violent actions, I think, is presumably, and just not based on any scientific study, but based on the evidence of all human history, I would say that nearly every other factor in your life is probably going to be more significant. Like, how much paint you ate as a child or something like that is probably going to be more of an influence on your behaviour than GTA. But all that being said, yeah, sure, fine, they have an effect, but that just makes them all like all other media, right? I don't think that's really in question. But the problem is that all of these studies are just really bad pieces of experimentation.
I think the subtext to this is that games academia is appalling.
Well, I might go further and say psychology is kind of shit. My sister will be angry with me for saying this because she's just been doing a psychology MA, but one of the studies, one of the kind of principal studies that it discusses in the first 25 minutes of this is a kind of aggression response study where they bring 256 people in, they subject them to playing games and test how aggressive they are afterwards. Now, there's lots of ways in which that is a shit study. Primarily, it's because the methodology of it is just shit. So, the way that they test aggression is to, I can't remember this particular experiment, but several of them have similar means of testing aggression, whereby they make you play a game, then you are instructed to punish somebody, and the amount with which you punish them is given as an indicator of aggression. The means of punishing them is like putting their hand in ice water for a bit of time, subjecting them to white noise or electric shocks. And I think even the fucking rudest dullard in the world would be able to tell that that's not what aggression is like in the real world. And not only is that not like aggression in the real world, like getting angry at somebody because they got in your way on the high street, but it's also presented within the context of an experiment. So it's completely not at all like the real world.
Yeah.
And that aside, it would be terrible anyway and completely meaningless because there's only 256 people and you just can't draw any kind of conclusion about anything with such a small sample size of people, I would say. Probably, especially about something so subtle as an increase in aggression. Again, every other factor in that person's life is going to be more important, including what they ate for breakfast that morning.
What effect did they say? What was their conclusion?
Well, for these studies, they categorically said there was an increase in aggression, and there were other studies later in the program which contradicted this flatly. But it took half an hour for Horizon to introduce this. So if you turned off during the first 25 minutes or fallen asleep, which is very likely, you would probably have left that program thinking that games were the great Satan. And it's full of dishonest reporting and presentation, that program. So when they're talking about one means in which they test for what they kind of bundled in with aggression and negative increase in negative emotions, they're testing the conductivity of your skin, and so the narrator says gravely that it can indicate stress or excitement or fear, and it's just sandwiched a completely normal response, excitement, between two negative sounding things, said it in a really bad way, soundtracked by dangerous sounding music. And yet, you kind of interpret that for more than a couple of seconds. You realise, well, actually, stress, excitement, and fear, like Mad Max, the latest Mad Max film would induce that. Playing squash would probably have a certain amount of that reaction. And is there going to be like a Horizon episode like, is tennis really that bad next year? I don't know. It's just, and even the studies which were in favour of games seemed also just either just obvious or...
Yeah, I actually spent a while, I don't know if this study was referenced, but you remember that study that got a little bit of notice about 3 months ago saying that games, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it basically said games don't make you sexist.
Oh yeah.
It was something like that. Games don't make you hate women more. It was something like that. And I got quite interested in this because I thought, well, where's the link there? Why are they studying that? And how could you study that? And I looked into it, and the methodology was unbelievable. The questions they were asking were so leading, to the extent that they would ask a question like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you hate women? And it's like, well, even if I do hate women, I'm not going to say that. Like anyone with half a brain is going to kind of make themselves look a little bit better than they are.
Or they kind of self-deceive. Most racists probably don't realise they're racist, do they?
And basically they were doing these questions, they were tracking certain gamers, asking more questions afterwards, and it was a very small sample size as well. And the questions to me bore no relation to what they were trying to prove. They were just a lot of generalised questions about your opinions on women. And then at the end they were like, this proves games, don't make people more sexist. And it was like, it doesn't prove anything. There's nothing in that study that is proving anything. And I sent it to an old friend of mine is a doctor of psychology, and I sent it to her, and she just laughed. I phoned her up the next day. I said, have you had a look at that? And she just went, don't waste your time. It's just complete trash. And I was like, well,
Like, most of the experiments they did in this episode, they didn't have any A/B testing, so they didn't test games against any other kind of influence. And there was one study which did test a violent game against a non-violent game, but games are really mechanically broad. Like, you could be unless they're in the exact same genre and it has the same amount of frustration and competition and expertise required, then you're going to get different results, complete different results. And to the program's credit, they did include one study which tested a game of Tetris against a game of Tetris which was rigged, so you lost. And so the person doing that experiment used that to kind of debunk these other studies to say that you got frustrated and it's not necessarily about violence. But there was in fact one study and one fact across the entire 60 minutes of the program which was worth interesting to, an interesting fact. I don't really want to know what you do with it, but it was when they brought on the neuroscientists, who are obviously actual scientists, rather than, flim-flam merchants. They tested people playing video games. They looked at the parts of the brain that were active, and they discovered quite credibly, in terms of the amount of data they produced, that people playing violent video games had a part of their brain activate which suppresses emotion. But they were quite careful to say that this part of the brain lights up in all kinds of other circumstances. It's not necessarily to do with violence either, and there's no suggestion that would have any kind of change in your behaviour in the long term or anything like that, or make you violent or criminal or anything. But that's just interesting, because that's actually factual, unlike most of the other program suppositions. And then, of course, it ends with, in an attempt to kind of rally for games, it brings out the studies which say, yeah, if you can use games to train skills and stuff. And you're like, well, no shit. Like, you train at something. It doesn't matter how virtualized it
Somehow
is.
managed to avoid that for 25 years.
Well, I don't know. They're talking about just basic cognitive response things. And I think that's obviously true, isn't it? I mean, that's just so obviously true. It doesn't even really need saying, but
I found that in real life now, I'm way better at ordering about 1,000 robots around. Just standing in my head. I used to really struggle with that as a kid.
Yeah. I don't know, it briefly touched on addiction, which I think is probably one of the areas of psychological study that's really worthwhile. But it didn't, the thing that's important about addiction is working out the boundary between where things are compelling and where they are coercive, What's the difference between saying you want to do something because you see some kind of intangible good in it, and being compelled, forced to do it, tricked into doing it by some kind of psychological trap? That's really interesting, and that obviously has a huge amount of impact, not only the industry, but on people's pocket money.
I read a Gama Sutra article about, or by a guy who is addicted to Steam card trading.
Oh, wow.
Steam trading card trading, I guess. And
that is a phenomenally boring thing to be addicted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have mine.
I thought that was bad enough that you couldn't get addicted to it. But no, and he's like, there is quite a big community of people who are, obsessive Steam card traders, and this guy at least uses them to get basically discounts on games. He the ultimate end goal is getting enough pennies together to get a game that's already discounted slightly cheaper because they're also selling a bunch of cards. And he stays up all night doing it. He lives somewhere where there's something, I can't remember what it is about the marketplace, but something resets at, I guess, probably 10 a.m. Pacific time, and it's 2 a.m. his time. And so he stays up every night to 2 a.m. to see that thing happen, because that's when the market, I think maybe the prices update, so you can see what your things are really worth, and then you can, if you're quick, you can sell your thing at the best price and get there before the other traders will ruin it for you by flooding the market. And
well, it is just stock trading, isn't it, basically?
Yeah, except for just pathetic amounts of money. He readily admits this. I think somewhere in the opening paragraphs is something about staying up an entire night to save £2.30 or something. And so there's really kind of sad kind of trading. But it was interesting to me because it was a pretty clear case of addiction. He doesn't enjoy it. He's not making money from it except in pathetic amounts, and he just kind of can't stop because it's just the maths of it is too compulsive.
Yeah. I mean, it only touched on addiction to say that you need to play way, way more than 20 hours a week, basically, to be qualified as addicted to games, which is, where you draw the line, I suppose. But I think if we were going to do a sensible, a really worthwhile study into games, would be to analyse the meaning of games on a case-by-case basis. Maybe like criticism, but in the mainstream media. That would be a valuable thing, I think.
If only.
Yeah. Valve should run experiments through Steam in the same way as Facebook ran experiments by only showing people positive and negative stories. Steam have got 125 million users, I think was the last public number. That's a fairly good sample size.
I'm sure they do. This is one of the most fucking annoying things about that documentary, is that you're sitting there saying, well, if only we could talk to the monsters who make these games. And you can, and their data is widely available. Like Riot have published loads of psychological papers on how they prime gamers in order to... I was checking up on this just before the podcast, and they did an experiment where they presented different kind of encouragements to be less aggressive to players, and they presented them in different fonts in different colours before each match. And they have such a huge sample size in the millions that they're able to say with a lot of assurance that showing a particular instruction in red makes people less aggressive than when it's shown in white. But with another instruction, showing it in red is negligible, whereas showing it in blue is good. And
we don't know what the fuck this means, but we're very, very sure that it's true.
Well, yeah, but I mean, a program investigating priming would be far more useful, really. I mean, is the colour red really that bad?
Apparently it makes you worse at taking tests.
Does it really?
Apparently it's a priming thing.
Valve also have done loads of testing with skin galvanic response as well. The the electrical resistance of your skin, in order to use it as a tuning method for their games.
Not just to manipulate you more.
Yeah, in order to keep you more addicted and afraid, yeah.
Did anyone read that article by a free-to-play designer? I believe it was on Gamma Sutra about 3 weeks ago, talking about targeting whales, but in a different way from usual, because people usually talk about targeting whales in quite a specific, quite a general sense. 2% of our audience are whales. And for anyone who doesn't know, a whale is a term used in the industry to describe very big spending players in free-to-play games. This guy was talking about how they would target whales personally, and they would notice someone in the game, let's say it's Graham, spends a lot of money, and they'll notice that Graham supports... Do you support a football team?
Yeah, Manchester United.
Okay, Graham supports Manchester United, so they'll be like, right, he's a glory hunter. And, but they then, I can't remember the team they mentioned, it was an American football team, but they worked out that this particular whale was a fan of the team. So they just made some virtual items featuring, this team's colours, made sure they were advertised to this whale in the game and priced them at around $900 each. And of course, this person bought them all. And the article's full of examples like that, which are obviously, heinous. The height of evil. But it gives you great insight into how deep these analytics go. It's not just a question of them getting all the data. It's a question of them getting all the data and then being able to combine all the data they have with other data they're able to pull from third parties like Facebook to tell that you're a fan of a particular football team and maybe you'd like something of those colours in your game, and they can put it right on your screen for $5, sir.
Right.
You know,
well,
pretty terrifying.
I think I've worked out that I'm being targeted by a combination of what Google has data on me for and what Google has data on me for. That's an amazing sentence. Google's data on me and Amazon's data on me has obviously been combined in order to show me pre-roll adverts for an Amazon app, which I don't currently have. But like other people, did any of you see this? It's like this been constant bombardment for me on YouTube. Obviously, they recognise that I'm a spender on Amazon because I've just recently bought like a stupid amount of audio equipment via it, and now they're saying, well, we've worked out this guy spends a lot of money with Amazon. He has Amazon Prime, but he doesn't have the Amazon app. We can get him to do this, and they've obviously passed this information onto YouTube in some way.
If Amazon have like deep analytics about how I'm using their service, they're probably just sitting back and cracking their fingers. Yep, we got him. He's just doing everything via us. It's just like his music, just every item he could ever want in his life. He just goes to Amazon and just buys it immediately without even really looking around that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all slaves of Bezos now.
Yeah.
I read an article a couple of months ago about the best players in the world, best in quotation marks, various free-to-play mobile games. And so it was like the person who was the top of the leaderboard for Clash of Clans.
This is somebody that spends nothing and just...
No, they spend like $600 a day in order to maintain their lead.
And is that factored into their best ranking? Like, that gives them an advantage, right?
Yeah, it allows them to gain points faster and get various XP boosts and that sort of stuff. And I think there's also trading mechanics and stuff like that. So they also have multiple accounts that they all feed into this one account, and then they write tips and guides about the game for the internet. So they have a little bit of a following, and one of their followers bought them 4 iPads so they could have separate accounts on each
so they can
one.
multi-box.
Yeah.
That used to be a thing in like MMOs, particularly WoW. People would multi-box and they'd buy like rich people would buy 36 machines and have them all set up in parallel and control all characters with the same keyboard. And
it's a major thing in EVE because you don't have to control it as much.
The thing was with this guy was that it sort of paid off because he got a job working for the company that makes Clash of Clans as like a consultant or something like that. And a consultant? Yeah.
Yeah, how do we get you to give us money? What would you give us $900 for? And please hand it over.
I mean, that is the basic rule of free-to-play design, no matter how much consultants design it, is that you have to give the players who are paying some sort of tangible advantage. Obviously, this rule kind of goes out the window when you're talking about something like Valve and TF2, but that's, a unique case. But the actual size of the advantage doesn't matter as much as you might think. All that matters is that there is an advantage there. So if you give players, a battle helmet that gives them 1% more armor, chances are in a fight with another player, that's probably not going to make a difference. It might make a difference in 1 of 50 fights. But the fact that they know it's better than any helmet that a free player can have, that's all that matters. They will buy it. So you need to give them that tangible thing, but it doesn't need to be game-breakingly big necessarily. It often is, but that's just because designers are bad.
It's really hard to know where the limit is. My instinct when I hear about these stories is that if you're going to do a game that has microtransactions in it, how do you draw the line and make sure you're not being exploitative and taking advantage of people, in particular people who spend more than they can afford. There are massively rich people out there who spend loads because it's just nothing to them, and there are people who aren't rich who are spending way more than they, really should. And I always want to say, well, you should just cap how much someone can spend in your game. You just say, once you spend $100, we just say, all right, you're a super player now, and you can just have the things that you want. But then I know Pip has spent several £100 on Dota. I think it was more than £200. And I don't know, do you know how much Chris has spent?
I have no idea, but I seem to remember him saying it was quite a lot.
Yeah.
But then...
And they're probably not unhappy with that, right?
No, I don't think so.
Sitting here feeling swindled or exploited.
No. Well, it's all cosmetic to some extent, and it's also their thing, like it's their hobby.
Yeah.
In a way. I suppose if you had a dog, you'd be happy to spend 200 quid on it across the course of, I don't know how many years Dota has been out. How long have they been playing it? Quite a lot. Over 4 years, something like that.
Is that a lot of the time, though, you're not buying stuff for the game? That's what's always nuts, is the fact that you're buying virtual stickers for your virtual magic book in order to you can, upgrade your account in order that you can unlock.
Chris has a large number of very cute-looking vinyl toys.
Yep.
I can't decide how to feel about it. My instinct is negative. I feel like there's something weird about it, but I also believe that the games industry gets better if really, really good things make more money than quite good things. Like, I think special editions are actually a really positive force. I think they mean that people, when you make something brilliant, you get more money than if you make something just quite good, and that has very broad appeal. And in fact, you can, possibly, it makes very specialised games more viable, because the people who really love it can support you better. And I want to say that you should just have a cap on that, and it should be quite low. But then maybe Dota 2 is like the perfect example of a game where, because they provide loads and loads of fun to the people who like it, and the people who like it fucking love it to the point of it being a lifestyle, that it's good that they have a way to continually fund it.
Well, it's like a sport, isn't it? It's like supporting a team or something like that. I don't know. I think when a game gets the size of Dota, I think it sheds some of the obnoxiousness about the idea of merchandising, because it does become something which you're a participant in as much as a customer of.
But I think the absolutely key thing about all Valve's games is that the free-to-play stuff is just outside of the game itself. And I'm not particularly Dota 2 man, but I'm a big Counter-Strike player.
Yeah.
And,
how expensive is your most expensive gun skin?
My most expensive gun skin is worth about 45 quid.
When you're also doing gambling.
I get, but that's not money. You gamble the skins, which I suppose is money. And there was a scandal where CS:GO pros threw a game for skins, which is just that's just unbelievable, because it was these 16, 17-year-old Counter-Strike players who basically threw their careers away because who would trust that guy to be in your team? And it was just for a tiny amount of skins.
So how did that work? How did they get the skins for losing?
Basically bots. They threw a game. They all bet on the other team, and they had bots betting on the other team as well. And the way that CS:GO Lounge works, the main betting site, is that the prizes are the people who were betting on the other side. The site is just a middleman. It doesn't invent skins. You just get what the other side is bet, and then it has a kind of.
So is that like legal? That's in accordance with Valve's TOS and stuff?
I don't know. I mean, it works
I'm pretty sure
with the API, all right.
Like the sites that let you gamble for money on these things are against the rules, right? You're not allowed to bet money on a match like that. But if it's just trading that's kind of arranged in advance, that's really interesting.
Well, the thing is, you place the bet, and then a bot friends you on Steam, and then you give the bot the items, and then if you win, you'll get pinged by the bot, and the bot will just give you them all back.
This is not what we imagine the future would be, is it? So the robot gave me the imaginary paint for the gun that makes a difference.
It's a wonderful future. And the only other one thing I would say is that sometimes people, take the piss for you, spending £10 in a skin or whatever. A lot of this is something I do all the time. But you have to realise, when you play Counter-Strike, when you're talking about like a gun like the AK-47, if you play Counter-Strike for 100 hours, you're going to be watching the AK-47 for about 80% of that time. And, it's pretty big on the screen. So it does feel good. And the amount of time I spend on Counter-Strike, like sticking a tenner in every 3 months, like, bargain.
Well, they deserve it.
Yeah,
At some point,
It's really... my tastes and habits have been such that although I'm incredibly passionate about quite a lot of different games, I've never been put in a situation where I'm tempted to spend large amounts of money on any of them. Even though, in the right circumstances, I would have spent hundreds of pounds on Deus Ex and hundreds of pounds on Hitman and these games that I keep on playing for years and years and years, and I'm getting loads from. If there was a sensible and efficient way to make me pay money for that, I would have.
Oh God, don't say that. But next Deus Ex.
Yeah, the
£5 per elbow chisel.
The Dota stuff, I guess I'm so disconnected from that game. I kind of I don't find it hard to imagine that there's interesting stuff going on with the things you can buy and the way they make your characters look and the way that kind of feels personal. But the CSGO skins, because I have played Counter-Strike and I know what a weapon skin is, it always just seems completely absurd to me, particularly because the ones you always see screenshots of are just so hideous. They're just like lurid orange and pink and just garbage, awful shit.
A lot of them are
The idea of that
disgusting.
being so desirable is just
What
mad.
about your own theme though? Because
theme?
you can do that now.
Like
you can buy
music?
you can buy music, and if you if the round ends and you're the MVP, it plays Tom Cruise.
Okay, that's quite cool.
It's pretty good.
That is awesome.
And it's got like all these weird little ones, like great Western tunes and stuff. So it's like, MVP Pentadac. Pretty good.
I would hope it would be what I'm using as my Metal Gear Solid helicopter music, which is Too Many Zoos.
Oh, yeah.
Panic sax.
Is that actually the name of the genre?
No,
That is so
no,
appropriate.
that's what I would call it. For sure.
It's very good. So what's going to go in the special edition of Heat Signature, Tom?
I don't know yet, but I'm really surprised at how many indies. Like, almost everybody's figured out you can sell the soundtrack separately, and that's the thing people want. And then, like, most indie games that come out that I see these days, the special edition is just that, you just get the soundtrack as well. And it seems like such a missed opportunity, really, because it's like, the soundtrack is already available individually anyway, and if you want it, like, very often in games, they're just in the folder somewhere, the music files are just there, and you can just have them if you want. And it seems quite easy to me to just put something extra in there, just like behind the scenes stuff. Like the thing I did with Gunpoint was just one of the things in the special editions was 10 versions of the game throughout development. Builds from the first week I started working on it all the way through to 3 years later. And that's so easy. I had that stuff lying around. I didn't have to bug fix it or anything, because the whole point is it's a broken mess and you can see how much it improved. And that just took no work, and loads of people seem to really respond to that. And I'm sure, like, almost any indie could do that, particularly if you think about it in advance. But even if you don't, if you're using any kind of version control system, you already have
The
builds.
Eurogamer thing didn't go down too well, though, did it? When they did the Gamers Editions, that was it, they called it. And
Oh yeah, that was
I
like
think
physical
one of them
merchandise.
got funded. But it struck
That was like
me
a sort of, they get a bit of really fancy merch designed, and then they do a kind of Kickstarter for it, where you pre-order, and if enough people pre-order, it gets made, but otherwise it doesn't.
Yeah.
But they were basically special editions. I mean, the odd thing in that case, I thought, was that they were games that had been out for a while. So it was Hotline Miami, Papers, Please, I think.
Love
launched with.
Trousers as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was like, well, I've got those games, and I like them.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend 80 quid on buying a special edition 2 years later.
Yeah, I think we talked about this maybe last week or
Whoops.
no, not that specifically, but fairly recently we were talking about the phenomenon that if you own a game, any package that includes that game, even if it's an amazing deal for just the other stuff, you have a really strong inbuilt resistance. Like, I don't want to buy the game again. I have the game. I don't want to buy it.
People just go nuts about that. People get really angry because the
Yeah.
Guild Wars 2 expansion didn't have a strong
think that's how it
enough
came up, actually.
discount.
Oh, yeah.
power.
It's the orange box phenomenon as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Chet Felzak said that Valve could put $50 in a box and sell it for $10.
I quoted
With
that
their-
exact thing.
Don't tell me.
Oh, it's all.
Although I couldn't remember who said it.
The only, well, it's not free to play, but the only game I've ever spent serious money on, microtransaction wise, was FIFA Ultimate Team. Because I always play a shitload of each iteration of FIFA, or have done for the last 3 or 4 years. And it's, you buy packs, and those packs have a random chance of having really good players in them, but also your contracts for your players run out and they get injured, and those packs also contain contract extensions and healing sponges and stuff like that. So you get into the odd situation of spending £6 to buy 4 packs so you can get a magic card to heal the bruise from the thigh of a footballer.
I know. I think.
There you
I
go,
think
my precious. It's all better
FIFA
now.
Ultimate Team. I think there's a reckoning coming for that in a young audience, because it's very inappropriate for kids, I think, and a lot of the mechanics they use. And certainly, I know of someone whose name I will not mention, whose son got hooked on it to the extent that he was sending emails to EA customer support, pretending his account had been hacked to try and get 100,000 points or whatever refunded, so he could buy more Ultimate Team packs. And it was like, this perfectly nice, normal little boy who's kind of trying to do something wrong.
Smacked up on footballers.
Yeah. And it's like,
Smacked up on magic sponges.
you know, should it really be in a game for kids? Not sure. I mean, I don't mean to be the kind of nanny state here, but I think FIFA Ultimate Team is pretty evil when you're talking about children.
Some of the most popular YouTubers as well are just people who buy packs and just open them on live streams.
Oh my god, Messi!
This drives Andy Kelly nuts because, you know, Andy Kelly obviously does these beautiful other places videos and, you know, they do quite well, but then there's like some, you know, 17-year-old who screams while opening FIFA packs and gets 5 million views.
It was one of those YouTubers posted a video a couple of weeks ago, which was him in LA doing a video tour of like his new sports car. He just bought like a Jaguar or something like that, and it was like that video got 2.5 million views within the first week.
Oh, we're all irrelevant. Has anybody been playing anything that wasn't Metal Gear Solid?
I have played a few things in the breaks in between Metal Gear Solid. I've played mostly Metal Gear Solid, but I actually a sort of vain attempt to distract myself from it. And I played a series of little indie games. The first of which was Circa Infinity, which I've mentioned before long ago, but is out now, as well as saying that it's out. It's a game where you are on the outside of a circle, walking around it, and when you reach a certain segment of the circle, like a little patch on the circumference, you can press a button to flip to the inside of it. And then from the inside of it, you can jump to get into the circle that is inside that one, and then you're on the outside of that one, and it keeps zooming in so that you're always kind of somewhere near the edge of the screen, and you're really just alternating between being on the outside of a planet type thing or the inside of that same planet. And as you go around, there are little demons that walk around in very rotationally symmetric patterns, and you have to jump over them and jump under the flying ones, and some of them can flip between worlds as well, so you have to time it so that when they flip down, you flip up, and that kind of stuff. And it's really visually brilliant. It just has this, it's almost all white, grey and red, and it has the look of a kaleidoscope because these things are repeated in these circular segments, and they dance around in very simple animations. They're very like blocky sprites. They kind of look like, they remind me a bit of Qbert, but with really stark colours, that becomes a really effective like motif. I love the visual style of it, and it is a good game, but I stopped playing it pretty quickly because I don't know if something's changed between the early version I played and the release version, but I remember one of my problems with the early version, and it was a relatively minor thing, was when you're walking around a circle, if you're standing on top of a planet, it's very clear that left is left and right is right. Then if you hold down right, obviously your character needs to move around the circle continuously. And you don't want them to stop at any point because you're still holding the key that you should be holding. Your character's going forwards. But then, of course, at some point you're on the underneath of the circle, and now you're holding right to go left. And if you then stop because you need to get past a monster who's in your way, then when you reach for the keyboard again and you want to go left, which direction are you going to press? Are you going to press right because that's what you were pressing last time to go left? Or are you going to press left because you want to actually go left? And
is it not always that your character's right?
Well, your character turns to whatever direction he's facing. It's side on, so it's kind of...
right, but I imagine if you're on the top, then you would reorientate yourself, so it would be this...
It could be that way, and maybe it used to be that way.
Oh, is it not? So it switches? It switches the nature of the
I don't know.
Because I did play this, I didn't even notice that.
So
I wasn't very good at it. Maybe that was why.
I feel like I definitely had a situation where I pressed the same key in the same situation twice, and it took me in two different directions. But I might be wrong. But I also think the problem is kind of unsolvable, because even if you do it the completely consistent way, I think the original version, I'm pretty sure that did it totally consistently, and I remember complaining about it, because every now and then I would, it's just, you're never going to make right as left completely intuitive. And this time, like I say, I can't be sure that the game's actually changed or whether I've just got worse at it, but I was worse at the game. And every single time I died, it was because I pressed right when I meant to go left. And at some point I decided, I'm going to stop trying to figure out what the design problem is here and just say, it is a design problem. I can't get over it. It's killing me every time.
Where does it go? Because I was playing it, I eventually gave up because I was thinking, it's only going to be this but harder for forever now.
Yeah, it seems to get... the colours change, it goes to blue instead of red. And I think it just gets... it's very visually spectacular. Actually, one of the things I do like about it is that it doesn't just get harder and harder and harder and harder. It kind of gets harder for this chapter, and then you finish the chapter, and the start of the next one it'll be easy again.
Ah.
So you get these kind of breaks, and it has good pacing. I didn't get far enough to know what it's like once it gets crazy, but the trailer shows different colours and different patterns and different enemies and that kind of stuff, and very spectacular looking arrangements of things. And then B, some really nutty stuff, which I can't tell whether you're actually playing it or whether it's kind of a cutscene of like a giant face eating the whole screen and stuff like that. The trailer's actually really good. It's worth watching that. So that was one thing, and I kind of bounced off it, but I don't... I kind of recommend it anyway. I think everyone should try it and just like figure out whether that particular control thing bothers them or not. So I think for some people it'll just be consistent, or just be intuitive rather. And the other thing I played was Undertale, which I also didn't get along with, and I also recommend. I wholeheartedly recommend a bunch of the games that ultimately didn't, that ultimately bounced off. This is a very Earthbound inspired game. So a sort of JRPG where you walk around very low-res, cute, pixely worlds and talk to people and solve puzzles and fight monsters. But the twist is that you can always talk to the monsters. And I've heard that you can complete the entire game without ever killing anything, at least. I don't know if you ever had to hurt anything. But one of your, like, in the JRPG nested menu system for the combat, you can say fight or you can say act, and then under act there'll be a bunch of different things like flirt, cheer, threaten, and stuff like that. And I really like the idea of it. And also the combat has an interesting idea too, where when the enemy attacks you, there's a little square below the picture of what's happening where there's a heart in it, and the heart represents you. And every enemy has a different set of kind of bullet hell style attacks they can do in that square. And so a frog will send a swarm of flies into that square, and you have to move your heart around and dodge all the flies. And every fly that hits you takes off 1 point of damage. And so how much damage you take is dependent on how well you do at that bullet hell game, which is a really nice idea. And even if you're going to talk to the monsters, you have to still dodge their attacks while you're talking to them. And so far they're all just really sad and depressed, and they don't want to fight you, but they do. And I've just been kind of charming my way out of it and just complimenting them or flirting with them and stuff and trying to convince them that they're worthwhile. And that kind of works. And so I really want to like it, but then they are random encounters. So you're like, as an example, you're in a room with 3 boxes and 3 switches, and you have to push the 3 rocks push the 3 rocks onto the 3 switches to get past, and there's a little twist that makes that a little bit more complicated. And while you're doing that, it's an otherwise completely empty room, but while you're doing that, it will just randomly go into an encounter, which I never played JRPGs, so this is new to me. And it's incessant. It just never stops. You fight the one fight, and then you get back out, and you get back to solving the rock puzzle.
Random encounters in 2015, I'm not even going to play this game. It's as simple as that.
And then, like, 15 seconds later, it just happens again. And there's nothing on the screen that represents it. I mean, every now and then you do see a monster on screen, but, like, in this particular room, there are none that I can see. And it's just blank floor, and I'm just being randomly pulled into this fight again. And I like the joke that I can flirt with them and try these other options and stuff. But even once you decide to do that, it takes, 4 or 5 cycles of that, and each time you have to play the bullet hell mini game to dodge their attack, and each time you have to go through the menu, which is like 3 levels of nesting to say the thing you want to say.
Yeah,
and
not going to happen.
It's just drove me slowly mad. But the reason it's interesting is that it has near universal, not just praise, but adulation. Like, I think it had 1 negative review on Steam, and it was someone who didn't even have
mean anything. Steam reviewers are idiots.
The 1 negative review was just saying that it was wrong that you can talk to the monsters, because monsters by definition should be evil and you must kill them. So the 1 negative review...
That's the guy who reviewed Dim for Edge.
Although the inverse of that guy.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So the 1 negative review doesn't even have a point. And everyone else just thinks it's the best fucking thing, just absolutely adores it. One guy says they just started playing and just couldn't stop for 8 hours and just played the whole thing through. And people I really respect on Twitter also are really into it. And apparently the random encounters get less frequent. And there was something else. I think that I was fleeing a lot, and I think if you flee, they're going to be more common because the things you fled from are still out there. Like each room does have a set pool of enemies that can be exhausted if you do defeat them all. But and so the creator of the game told me that on Twitter, and I thought, great. And I went back to it and fought a frog, and I charmed it into stop attacking me, and then moved 6 paces and got attacked by the same frog. So, okay. I think maybe I'll go back to it, but I'm possibly done with it for now. But it is really sweet and charming in every other way.
Apparently, I think there's like a flower monster that takes you through the tutorial.
Yeah.
Apparently, you could just kill her.
Well, that tutorial is kind of great. There are loads of different things you can do in that tutorial, and even if you just play it straight, it has a big twist to it, and it's just kind of all the eventualities are funny, and yeah, it's one of those things where if you know the twist is coming, you can do a different thing to try and avoid it, but that just leads to a different encounter. Try not to spoil it, even though it's a tutorial. But it is kind of like the whole point is the twist.
I've been playing. Have you spoken about Grow Home on this before? Because I was playing Grow Home this week.
I love Grow Home. I don't know if I
Grow
talked about it on the podcast though.
I've been playing Grow Home this week. I've been playing obviously Hots with you, Marty. My
Classic game.
My sister in arms. Marty plays Johanna, and I play Vala, 2 of the Diablo heroes.
How much have you guys spent on HOTS? Relevant to our earlier discussion.
£30-ish, I think, probably.
Yeah, about the same, but I didn't. Marty spent a lot of money on HOTS for me for my birthday.
Oh, yeah,
He bought me some BattleNet credit, which I immediately spunked up the wall on the Nexus pack and got Rollerblades Nova.
Quite right.
HOTS, Hearthstone, and its new expansion, which I've actually forgotten the name of, Knights and something. It's a jousting tournament. Grow Home, and tons of Metal Gear.
Tell us about Grow Home. What have you been doing it?
Not been doing too well in it because the thing I really love about it is I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it. The lack of control you have over Bud, the slight slipperiness he has to him when you're climbing.
You might remind people what it is.
So Grow Home is a game that basically you play a little robot called Bud, B-U-D. I can't remember what that stands for, but something rubbish. And you walk through this kind of charmingly low poly world. It actually reminds me quite a bit of Space Station Silicon Valley, if anyone ever played that back in the day. It has this sheep at the very start of it, this kind of clueless looking sheep with giant kind of boggle eyes, and that's just straight out of Space Station Silicon Valley. And there's this thing called a star plant, and you can find these red flowers on it, jump on them, and then you kind of, this sounds a bit dirty, but you get them between Bud's legs and then kind of shoot out and guide it towards crystals. And if it lands in the crystal, you have to do a certain number for each height of the plant. The plant will grow by X hundred meters. And the whole game is to get to 2,000 meters. I think you start at 200 or something. But what you're really doing in the game is just climbing. It's, the plant itself, the way it can grow, is quite free, I think. Quite often you'll jump on one of these red flowers and you haven't seen a crystal. You're just thinking, I'll find one. And you don't find one. And you kind of end up creating this kind of weird, gnarly branch that because at the end of it you were looking around for a crystal, it kind of goes, ooh, turns into a spiral at the end. But then red flowers will start growing out of that. And then you can use that to kind of start shooting out and looking for other crystals. And as you get higher, the crystals kind of get further and further away. I mean, I'm not enormously high. I think I'm like 500 meters or something. And you can, it's just a delight because the climbing, which is the main thing of it, you do it with, basically you have a left hand and a right hand control. And as you kind of alternate them, you get a real sense of climbing. But also, Bud himself, when you're moving about on the thing, he doesn't respond in the way video game characters usually do, which is usually, if you think about a 3D character like Mario, for example, Mario is extremely precise. with Bud, his feet skitter a bit, and he slides and he slips, and obviously the fact he's on very uneven surfaces a lot of the time gives it a kind of chaotic quality. And the thing I love the most about it, I think, the climbing, is that while you're using the hands, you can use his feet. So you're skittering up, and his little feet are at the bottom, kind of pattering away, and you're like, wow, I'm going like half a second faster here, giddy up, Bud. And also the fact that at the start, I didn't really realise what the flowers were doing, and the flowers are now my favourite thing in the game. One of the things about climbing, of course, is that sometimes you will fall, and in Grow Home, when you fall, you can fall enormous distances because you're on this gigantic pillar, basically. But when you fall giant distances, you can just pop out a flower, and then Bud just kind of gently floats, and he doesn't really lose a lot of height at all, so you're able to, pretty easily rescue it. It's another thing I love about it, where it doesn't feel like a punishing game at all. It's just a lovely game. You really enjoy what you're doing in it. The objective isn't something you get in another game, and there's no. I don't know. It's just a pleasure. It's a nice game. I'm really enjoying it. I'll definitely finish it.
Well, not exactly underrated, but just like it should be. It was one of my games of the last year, I think. It was just so pleasant, so zen. But got to the end of it, I kind of felt slightly bereaved in a way which I don't often feel from games. Like I often play games until I'm sick and then I'm done with them. But this had a sort of really
you're either sick or in grief.
This had like a really definitive end point to it, but it felt like something that could have gone on forever, really, or at least a lot longer. And I was kind of sad to complete it because it's just such a lovely place to be. And it's such a nice tactile experience climbing up, I think.
Yeah, so I've been loving that. HOTS, should we talk a bit about HOTS, or do you talk about HOTS all the time?
I did talk about HOTS a lot last week, and I don't want, some of our listeners are...
All I'm going to say is that Marty is the best buddy you could have.
There you go.
Saves my ass all
That's
the
exactly
time.
what I said last time.
And I've been playing the new Hearthstone expansion, which it just seems to be a lot more RNG, basically.
Oh, really?
And the main thing it does is it introduces this new mechanic called Inspire, which is... if you play a card with Inspire and then use your heroic ability, whatever its Inspire ability is will trigger. So this is basically bringing a new mechanic into Hearthstone. It's pretty interesting. It kind of comes into play a lot more with certain classes, I find. For example, I play a kind of paladin buff deck where you get lots of crap minions and you just want to buff them to hell. And you can get this 5-mana card, which I've forgotten the name of, which buffs every minion you have by +1/+1. So obviously, if you get that out at the end of the game and are able to use your heroic ability, it's an enormous thing. But not only that, it becomes a huge target for the enemy's removal. So if you've got kind of, a Tyrion Ford ring in the back, you'll chuck him out and inspire him so the opponent panics and uses their polymorph, whatever, and then down comes Tyrion. In terms of actual interesting uses of Inspire, though, there haven't been that many. Like they all do useful things, but when I was first reading about Inspire, I thought it would be a new kind of dimension to Hearthstone, and it doesn't really feel like that in practice. It just feels like you put these cards out, you use your heroic, and you get the battle cry that you would have had anyway, because you can't rely on them surviving for 2 or 3 turns. They're not strategic like that. And a lot more, Blizzard really seem to have doubled down on RNG in Hearthstone. They really, the random number generator, RNGesus, they love cards that have unpredictable effects, and to a certain extent I like them too. It is fun playing a card where you're going to distribute 3 damage and you don't know where it's going. But it does seem that they, when I've been playing it, I find I do these beautifully constructed decks, or I think they're beautifully constructed with my great plan. And I'm still losing to the kind of decks that I lost to a year ago, face hunters and stuff, these very simple kind of damage decks. that are so simple that people have created bots that play them. You know, it's and I don't know if Blizzard have kind of. Well, I don't know where they're going with Hearthstone.
It seems like this is their crisis across all of their games as well. Whether they're making those games for a pro scene or whether they're making it for raw noobs.
Yeah, a little bit, and I also think Hearthstone has a little bit of the same problem HOTS has, and Dota 2 and LoL as well, which is that a lot of these new cards have just completely rendered old ones obsolete. It's because this is the new expansion. We're going to make you buy the new expansion because if you don't, a lot of the cards you've been relying on are junk now. And it's the same with when Leoric came out in HOTS a couple of weeks ago. Made a lot of tanks kind of pointless because he's so good. And obviously they're doing that because they want everyone to buy the new hero. And it's kind of, it is frustrating. It does bother me in HOTS as well, because it's a pattern. It's not something they do by mistake, because every hero they've released since the game released has been kind of OP and then nerfed a month later. And it's like, well, I'm sure that makes a lot of sense to the bean counters, but like to somebody who plays the game all the time, it's really annoying. It's just like, I'm going to buy the new heroes anyway. It doesn't, you don't need to kind of unbalance the game slightly for a month to encourage that. But, what do I know? I'm not the one worth, half the universe.
There's always the accusation against World of Warcraft as well, that expansions would come out and they would always have like an ultimate raid in there that was basically impossible, and then like 2 months before the next expansion was due, that raid would suddenly be made half as easy. They would suddenly go, this is super imbalanced, and they would rebalance it so lots of people would complete it and then feel now ready for spending more money on the next expansion.
Well, I'm sure they do it, and when you see the kind of this stuff happening in HOTS, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to be too critical of it because there is also the side that they want to make exciting heroes that have powers that upset the balance that already exists.
But there's also the thing that changes to the meta of that game may affect different skill levels differently. Like, I mean, you were a big fan of the Vikings. Oh, we are talking about HOTS even this. Well, you were a big fan of the Vikings, so this kind of micro-heavy trio of characters you play at the same time. And obviously, at the pro level, they were massively overpowered because people who can play them are really, really good at them. I couldn't ever play them, though, so they were never overpowered to me.
Yeah, well, the Vikings were OP, but they just, nerfed them into oblivion, basically. But let's not bore everyone to sleep with the minor changes to the Lost Vikings talent tiers. Fuck you, brother.
Let's do some questions from questions. In fact, before you said that, I just remembered we got an email from or a tweet from Scoo, who's a listener of us, who sent us a picture, which said, "To be this questions takes Snoitsiak." In the Sega font, obviously, which is very good. My favourite piece of CNC-related paraphernalia.
Fan art, come on.
That right.
It's funny, even before you get to the backwards questions, to be this questions, it's just funny.
Thanks. Snoitsiak.
Doug Patton writes, "Dear revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries, greetings from Burkina Faso. Stuck as I am in the middle of a somewhat shonky but nevertheless ongoing coup d'etat, with naught but 2 fine companions," an asterisk there, 4 days sheltering in place together in a small guest house with shitty Burkinab internet is a true test of friendship, and desert golfing for company. I was wondering, when the chips are down, which games are the ever-present for you? The games you never leave home without? The ones that are fully updated and ready for Steam's dreaded and historically at least temperamental offline mode? Normally I would have a few trackpad-friendly games from yesteryear that aren't too much of a strain on the laptop, FTL being absolutely essential, Civ 4, Hexels, etc. But we've, me and the laptop that is, been tragically separated until angry people stop burning tyres on the road between our guest house and the lab. Thanks for the wonderful podcast. I have a few episodes from last month saved up for when we actually get the hell out of here. Soon, according to some lovely people from Harvard who are working night and day to pull us out. Best, Doug.
Well, comrade, I hope you're safe.
This is pretty amazing.
Yeah, Doug is probably our listener, and in fact, you can all write in to compete with this. But I mean, our listener who is most useful to the human species, and he is researching malaria and I think malaria cures relating to mosquitoes, which is why he's in Africa currently.
I just imagine him like ducking behind a concrete barricade with bullets whizzing over his head and like grenades going off, saying, "What games do you think are essential for laptops when you go abroad?"
Listening to the podcast, thinking, "Oh fuck, they're talking about HOTS again."
I don't have time for this.
I used to have a really shitty laptop. I don't have a laptop anymore, but I used to have a really bad one. To the extent that it was just a word processor, you know, I couldn't really play games on it. And what I realised was I could play very old games on it. And the one that I became obsessed with was the original XCOM, which I had when I was young. But I could never get anywhere in it, even though I liked it. And I kind of came back to it as an adult. And whenever I'd go back up to my parents or anything, because like my dad doesn't have a PC, I'd take this crappy laptop and just play the original XCOM for a week. It's nails hard, but that was always the game. I had other ones on there, but it was always XCOM I'd end up playing. Really does stand up and really difficult, but in a quite rewarding way. Like the modern XCOM, I mean, I really like it. I think it's a great game. And obviously if you play it on Iron Man, it does get that level of difficulty, but the original XCOM is just that by default. But you do learn it, you know, like you learn that game by just failing at it 50 times. And then when you go in and you actually kind of are able to complete it, it feels so good. I loved it. So that would be my answer, the original XCOM, but only if your laptop is so crap it can't run any modern games.
I actually discovered that Invisible Ink runs on my MacBook Air, and that was a great revelation. And runs really well, actually, so I imagine you can get away with a lower spec laptop and it would still be okay. And also, even if it doesn't, like if it runs at all, then that's all you need, because it's turn-based, so it doesn't matter if it's not smooth or anything. And I also feel like it's a really beautiful game, and it's pre-rendered beautiful, so I think that they're rendered to 2D sprites, so it's not going to get worse at lower graphic settings. And I wouldn't mind if it wasn't beautifully smooth, because the animation is kind of intentionally jerky, or it's very like swift and just happens in quick bursts and then it's over. And that's a game I could play forever.
My equivalent of that, I guess, was the original freeware release of Splunky, which similarly, I think was locked to maybe like a 640 by 480 resolution, and it's pixel art, and so it just runs perfectly fine on my shitty old netbook, and so I used to just travel around with that on a USB stick, basically, and it would run from the USB stick because it's so small. What kind of more other equivalent is maybe whatever the most recent Football Manager game is. I do sometimes go away on holiday and leave my PC on at home so that I can use Splashtop, which is an iPad app, to stream my PC's desktop over the internet to my iPad. And then Football Manager is just menus that you click on, so I can sit in a hotel in New York using my iPad to play Football Manager over the internet and my PC that's still on back at home in Bath.
Wow, that's quite a damning indictment of Sports Interactive's iPad version of Football Manager.
Well, apparently, actually, there's news in this, because Football Manager 2016, I mainly play Football Manager in the classic mode, because the regular mode is fucking absurd and takes so long to actually get anywhere. The mobile edition now just is classic mode as of FM 2016, and you can actually buy it separately. So the iPad version, although I don't think it will run on my iPad 2, I think probably my iPad's too old and shit now. So
I wouldn't trust Sports Interactive with that, because they spent a lot of time bigging up their Vita version of last year's Football Manager, and it was the full Football Manager experience, you know. It just wasn't optimized in any way for the Vita. You know, it was basically the PC version running on a Vita, and like the Vita is obviously a handheld console with buttons and, you know, a D-pad and an analog stick, and when you're using a cursor, and it was like, I was very disappointed in them, actually.
That's a shame.
Yeah, I thought that would have been a perfect fit, because I never used my Vita for anything, and I thought finally I'll have an excuse to take it away, and I didn't.
I've got, whenever I go offline or when I move house, I haven't got the internet yet, I go back to this folder which has existed across many, many different iterations of my PC's life, which just has all the basically
all your porn?
my huge amount of disgusting pornography, obviously, but also all the kind of indie games I ever installed which didn't require Steam, all the kind of pre-release versions of games, all the IGF games I've ever got, obscure things like this Gunpoint, heat signature. I don't know what that is. There's League of Legends in there for some fucking reason. I don't know what that is. Yeah, lots of good stuff in there though. But all of it's
Sounds
kind of like weird.
The 3 best games ever. Right?
Weird beta release stuff though. Like Minecraft is in there.
I've got to say, I think FTL was a great shout.
Oh yeah, that is probably one of the best spots. Starseed Pilgrim, Spelunky's in there. Classic games.
Does that new game Starseed have anything to do with Starseed Pilgrim? I don't know anything about Starseed.
Probably not.
I didn't hear anything about a game called Starseed, but I don't think Starseed Pilgrim has a sequel.
So there is an entire site, like a sort of games journalism site that only covers Starseed Pilgrim.
Wow.
Regularly posts articles and in-depth stuff.
Wow.
And it's called the Starseed Explorer, maybe, or Starseed Observatory, something like that.
It's pretty great, that game, but I don't know if they're supporting the entire site.
Yeah, this was a long time ago that I saw it, last year, anyway. And I haven't checked it since, so it's possible it just stopped immediately after I looked at it. But maybe it's still going, I don't know.
One of my favourite kind of niche journalism sites ever was that one that just compared every game to Dark Souls. The guy was like...
That's just mainstream game journalism.
the guy behind it was, obviously... very clever and really loved Dark Souls, and he brilliantly analysed all these other games and why they didn't measure up to Dark Souls in his estimation. And it was like, obviously I agreed with him, 'cause but yeah, I loved that. What a way to approach it. I remember him just savaging Tomb Raider. It's like, brilliant.
Did he give a rating out of Dark Souls? Like 3 out of Dark Souls?
No, sadly not. But every game at the end of each review was found to be not as good as Dark Souls.
James Clayton writes, Dear Creators, a few weeks ago I wrote in on the subject of sound design, thanks for your thoughts by the way, declaring that I would pre-order any game with music by Austin Wintory. It now turns out that he is scoring Assassin's Creed Syndicate. I am ensnared by my own foolish words. Please help me, what should I do?
Well, Mary Poppins, you better buy the game.
I didn't have an answer for him, I just thought that was hilarious. Like the idea of Assassin's Creed Syndicate as being like the worst thing that could have happened. Oh god, I'm going to have to buy this. It's funny how that series, which has had many great moments in it, has
somehow
become the butt of jokes. Just because they were so relentless with iterating on it in... Iterating's the wrong word, because unlike a street in GTA, they didn't make it any better. They just sort of randomly deviated in... It's like if you, the most basic form of AI you can program is like a random wandering algorithm, where every frame, they just randomly pick a direction and go in that for a little bit. That's what the Assassin's Creed series direction has been like.
People like this thing. Why don't we make them do it 100 times?
People like this thing in the last game, let's do something totally different now. Or people didn't like this, let's do that again.
Yeah. I don't really think they're very well directed, those games.
You've never liked Assassin's Creed?
No, I absolutely have. I thought Assassin's Creed 2 was a fantastic game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, I really loved that game. I did everything
2
there
and
was
4
to do in it.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
I despised 3. I thought that was appalling.
I remember you being an early detractor of 1.
1 was... I was so angry about the reviews that 1 got. I was furious because I felt that was a large-scale failing across the games media, because it got 9s. It got 9s. I think it even got a couple of 10s, and the lowest scores it got were like 7s. And to me, that game was unfinished. I mean, it wasn't ready to be released. There was nothing in it.
It was definitely a proof of concept.
Yeah, exactly.
But there was like a 7 out of 10 level of enjoyment just pissing around.
maybe, at the top level. But everyone just, it just got a free pass. So that was why I was furious about it, because I played it. And, it looked fantastic. I mean, it looked amazing. And then when you played it, you were like, what is this? 3 was awful. 4 was pretty good. And I didn't bother with Unity.
Yeah.
What was that one that kind of got forgotten because it came out at the same time as Unity, but it was the last gen one? You're on boats
Rogue?
like in 4, yeah.
Yeah, Rogue, yeah.
Because I heard good things about it, but I realised I'm never going to play it because it's
Was that
not
the
on.
PSP one?
No, the Xbox and Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, I think.
Yeah, and then it came to PC like 9 months after
It actually
Unity.
gone to PC.
Yeah, it's on PC now.
I meant to play the side-scrolling Assassin's Creed games because they're pretty good. Released on PC.
Yeah, made by a UK company, I think.
They're such a tragedy, those games, because the amount of resource that goes into them, and they really are quite beautiful. And there's just not much there, I think. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Syndicate is when it turns around. And I hope for our dear letter writer's sake, it is.
Matthew Storr writes, Dear Crate and Crow Dudes, way back in episode 13 of the pod, give a little pluck to their lovely Loom of Fate.
That's the title of the pod.
Yep. It's hard to say. Chris stated, becoming less terrible at Dota is never going to serve me except in that one narrow community in that one game. Yet here we are, under 2 years later, where his knowledge and passion of Dota has presented Chris with an opportunity to make that sphere of gaming his new job. What other games, or maybe genres, did you not expect to grow as large as they have? Did you even write any of them off, thinking that they would surely flounder? Conversely, are there any games you expected to be huge industries in themselves, but subsequently didn't? Keep up the great podding, Matt. I don't know if Chris thought that Dota was, going to wallow in obscurity. I think it was already a massive phenomenon. Like, by the time Dota 2 was made, Dota was a massive phenomenon. But I definitely, there's so much, all of the really popular genres I would have sworn were never going to catch on. Minecraft, you could tell something special was there, but I always thought that it would be more of a barrier to it, that it had no tutorial, and it really didn't help you at all. It was just so cold and just... if you have a friend helping you with it, then it's great, and that's obviously how it ended up spreading. But for me, even though I had 3 friends who play Minecraft, when I was actually trying to learn it, I wasn't sitting there amongst friends, I was sitting there on my own. And just basic stuff like that craft, what's it called, workbench you have to build in order to be able to craft anything. I didn't know how to... I made one of those by accident by putting things together, and that part was intuitive enough. But once I had it, it was just a thing in my hand. I didn't know how to use it. So I was just hitting things with a workbench, just knocking down trees with a workbench. This isn't much faster than punching a tree. Is this any good? It's got a picture of a saw on it, and that's all I could tell. It was just a saw with a brown border. And so I hit things with my saw with a brown border, and nothing happened. And I literally had to just find out the next day that, you can right-click to put it on the ground, and then... I think I'd already put it on the ground, but then after it's on the ground, you can press it either right or left, I can't remember. I've been Minecraft for a long time, to actually use it, and that creates a new interface that you've never seen before, and there's no kind of tip for that control. I always thought that kind of stuff would hold it back. Apparently not! And same for DayZ and stuff like that, the difficulty of getting into it, I always thought that was a key thing, you've got to get that right or you'll never take off, and history has completely proved me wrong on that.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? There was a period of time where it seemed like accessibility was going to be the way to open games up to huge markets.
Yeah.
But I realised actually after all of that accessibility is something I value and maybe nobody else does.
I think it's something to do with it has to be good enough and it has to hit that critical mass in the first place. And then once it does, it doesn't matter if it's inaccessible because it spreads through people telling each other about it. And
Yeah.
they want to get their friends into it, and so they tell them everything they need to know, and wikis spring up and that kind of stuff. I also had an answer for the games you expected to be huge industries in themselves, but subsequently didn't. I don't know if I realistically expected it to, but I always thought the Last Stand mode of Dawn of War 2 was an amazing thing, and I really wanted that to become a genre unto itself, which is where it's a co-op mode where 3 of you... Does it have to be 3?
Yeah.
You all play one hero each, like in Dota, and it's this is based on an RTS game where heroes are like RTS units, but they can level up and they have equipment and special abilities and stuff. But it's just 3 of you against hordes and hordes of AI stuff, including bosses and things like that come in preset waves, and it's very carefully scripted to give you these very, very tough waves and then easy waves and different challenges with each one. And it was amazingly fun, and in particular I love the level up system in it. I think it's the best level up system I know of in any game, where you have a set number of slots, like you have a primary weapon slot and a armor slot and 3 accessory slots and maybe a head slot or something. And then each time you level up, you unlock a new thing that can go into one of those slots, and it could be any of those slots. And there's, I don't know how many levels, 20 levels or something, and each time you get a new item. And so it doesn't, early on, when you have nothing in your slots, obviously it makes you better because you're putting things in that you didn't have before. But once you've filled those, which you do fairly early on, then it's just a question of replacing things that you already have. So you don't get more powerful, you just get more options. But each new option always has these really interesting ways it combines, because they all have these like huge buffs. For the Orc champion, there's a knife that heals you by some absurd amount per second, and it does like an okay amount of damage. But the other weapons are like rocket launchers and incredible guns, and this is obviously restricted to melee. Does an okay amount of damage, and it compensates for everything else by just making you so incredibly fucking tough that you can almost never die. And if you couple it with the other, like there's also a set of armor that gives you a massive health boost, and there's I think one of your boss poles increases your resistance, and it seems amazing. And then one of the bosses there was only one map for ages. I think there's only two now. One of the bosses towards the end of that map was one of the final waves with mirror copies of yourself. And if you've done the perfect tank orc, it's impossible to defeat the other tank orc because he's so fucking tough. Like all that stuff that made you great, you realise there's no way to kill this fucker. He's just solved it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, I think that's one of the best game modes I've played in recent years. Last Stand is superb. And just like Tom, I got addicted to. I played the Chaos Marine, and had some sort of blood-sucking build where I could suck back. It's just fantastic. I was actually surprised recently by Hearthstone's success. I mean, I expected it to be successful in the way that, all Blizzard games are successful to a certain extent, but it's been enormously successful to the extent that it's now a priority for Activision Blizzard as a larger company. And I think that reflects not just that Blizzard did a great job making a card game, but also that Magic the Gathering has fucked it. they've left it too late. I mean, as someone who I'm not a Magic obsessive or anything, but I play Magic. I like it. I think it's a great game. And
even the digital versions of it have been pretty good. The ones made by Stainless.
The ones made by Stainless are good, but they're very limited because you can't do any deck building in the preset decks. And the Magic Online client, which is Wizards of the Coast main thing, which is where you can do deck building, is a nightmare.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. I think it's a subscription service as well, and it's just a really old client. It's a horrible.
They just released a new one, didn't they? Like Magic 2015 Duels or something like that, which is designed to take, because they previously did Jewels of the Planeswalker, and this is designed to take that, make it more accessible, and has a better single player campaign and that sort of stuff. But I don't think no one seems to have noticed that they released it.
Well, I just think they've left it too late now, because if you play a card game to any degree, if you play a card game for more than an hour, you want to build your own deck. And, that's the beauty of Magic. There's so many cards in it. And I just think Wizards of the Coast have left it too long, and basically Hearthstone has drunk their milkshake.
Drunk it up.
There's a good Assassin's Creed game. What was that Assassin's Creed card game you got?
Recollections. That was one of the greatest card games ever made.
What was it on?
iPad. The reason Recollections is a brilliant, brilliant card game is that it uses time in a way that a real card game couldn't. So the cards, you put them down, and obviously in games like Magic, you have or Hearthstone, you put cards down and they have a turn to get ready or something. But it's much more fluid in Recollections. What you have is you have the board, which is bottom half you, top half your opponent, and it goes through the day with a little line, a very faint line, going across the screen, and just keeps on going. But as it moves across, cards resolve, but they resolve at their own pace, and you can put them down at any time. So you're timing when they're going to become active, rather than depending on turns. It's depending on the overall clock. I'm probably not explaining this very well, but it gives you much, much more control over when stuff is going to become active and when you can use it. It's just superb. Unfortunately, Ubisoft, they followed that up with an appalling Assassin's Creed card games and just appear to have killed Recollections. I thought that was one of the best card games I've ever played. But sadly, you can't really play it now because it's dead, and I have, because I spent quite a lot of money on it.
Uramiah asks, what's your favourite single-player game to play with a group of friends? I wanted to add a shout-out to FTL for this.
Oh, yeah.
We tried that at a party, and it was... I think there must have been 8 of us just voting on every decision we made. And
Bellowing, smell the glaive.
I was controlling, which we can coin the phrase "smell the glaive." And that was, I don't know if we got lucky or whether it just works out better with a sort of council, but we got really far, and it was a really tense, close game with loads of, amazing close shaves and stuff.
I've been playing Until Dawn with Chris at the moment, which is a PS4 game. It's a terrible game, but it's kind of amusing to play as a group. It's a kind of horror game. Much like Heavy Rain, in that it's basically scripted, but you make certain choices and there are kind of QTEs basically. And on that basis is obviously a backward step for the entire medium. But there's something about directing the idiocy of unlikable teens who are obviously going to be killed. That is a great kind of communal sport.
Are video games really that bad? James Vokes writes, talking of questions, if you could poll all gamers instantly and get truthful answers back, what would you ask? Or a subset of gamers, players of a certain game, etc.
Do you feel more aggressive than you do?
I was going to say, what are your bank details?
Bristle Martin.
Man, my interpretation of this question is that it says, and get truthful answers. Truthful sort of also implies accurate, right? Because the problem with like testing and stuff, when you ask people what they think, it's not so much that they lie, it's that they don't know why they feel certain ways, or that they feel certain ways, and they can't articulate it sometimes. So what I'd really love is the ability to ask people and get the real, true answer, regardless of whether they know it themselves.
I think Tom Stoppard said it was always useful to get feedback because people are always wrong about why they think things. But so they're always right that something's wrong, but they're wrong about how to fix it.
Yeah,
I think, but
that comes up a lot in game development.
I think my question would just be: did you really read the article?
I think, when I ask things about like collectibles and stuff, I know that they are appealing to some people, but I don't know whether. Are you enjoying it or are you addicted? Which comes back to our earlier discussion. There's loads of things like that where I want to know, like, is this... I know this is a popular thing that other games do because it works, but is it working in a positive way or is it just a compulsion? I'm also kind of curious about fourth wall breaking, what people's tolerance for that is. Because I think I did it in the Gunpoint demo, but I didn't do it in Gunpoint. But I did do it in Gunpoint Achievements. And I felt like, because achievements pop up from Steam, and it's the gaming application that is telling you this thing, I felt like it was okay to talk directly to the player. But then the game itself, as far as I can remember, doesn't ever properly break the fourth wall. It might have like wry references to things and stuff.
I think fourth wall breaking is going to be an interesting thing with the advent of VR, because I think we're in a weird moment at the moment with games where people are completely accepting of breaking the fourth wall. They're quite capable of compartmentalizing their experience in ways in which they appreciate, for example, the game mechanics separately from the plot and their own player actions. They don't necessarily see a dissonance between standing on the table and spinning while speaking to, David Sarif in Deus Ex. But I think as you become more embodied in a fiction, I think that stuff is going to become more of a problem. Little thought for you there.
Thanks. Rich writes, Dark Souls 3 is coming. Can you have too much souls?
Did I write that?
Different Rich, but could have been you.
Does some of the magic fade with each release?
Yeah, without a doubt. I thought Dark Souls 2 was poor. I know other people love Dark Souls 2 and think it's fantastic.
In the room.
Well, I don't think it's fantastic. I think it was the best game of that year.
Oh yeah,
that's pretty fantastic.
It's pretty fantastic.
I do agree. It's a very good game. I don't mean to imply it's a bad game or say it's a bad game, which I pretty much did. But Dark Souls within itself was pretty much perfect and self-contained, and I think they really missed a trick in what they did between Demons and Dark Souls. I was saying this to you the other day in the pub, I think, where Demons and Dark Souls was perfect because they took the mechanics but just completely changed the world and the setting and a couple of the things they did. And they are very distinctive games, but obviously very similar. And I think Dark Souls 2 suffered from being a sequel to Dark Souls. I think that would have been a much better game if it was just allowed to be its own world and its own thing and called Dragon Souls or something. I think that would have done it a lot of favours.
Interestingly, I think it was initially intended to be within the same world, but much more mechanically different. Going by those interviews they've said where they had to scrap the game, and they basically made Dark Souls 2 as we know it now in a year, using kind of a mash of assets from the aborted version, but it was clear that they had a much more ambitious idea for how that would mechanically differ from the first Dark Souls.
And that in itself is a problem with the sequel. You know, you have to ask, if they were making a game with a different title, would they have necessarily made that change?
Yeah.
Was it just because the mechanics weren't working, or was it because it would have been too far away from what people expected from a Dark Souls game?
I don't think it was that. I think it was technologically impossible. Like, I think it's to do with the lighting in the engine, actually. Like, they probably couldn't get parity across all the different platforms they wanted to release and have a huge amount of dynamic lighting in the game. Because a lot of those areas in that game are flat lit, and obviously the mechanic that was purported to have been the thing that was driving the game initially was that you would be able to light different areas successively. And you can do that in bits of Dark Souls 2, but like it seems
it's
to be
never
like
really a mechanic, is it?
No. Yeah, so I wonder if it was just purely.
Well, of course, the best counter to this argument is Metal Gear Solid, which has reinvented itself with every single entry. And, you know, still fantastic.
Wow. At its most fantastic right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Some would say.
Which leads neatly on to our next question, also from Rich. Is Snake Eater still the best Metal Gear game?
Well, it's impossible to answer, isn't it? Because it's a very different type of Metal Gear game from Metal Gear 5. I would certainly say in terms of a single self-contained narrative experience, if somebody wants to sit down for a couple of nights and play a Metal Gear game and get a great story, Metal Gear 3 is still the one. I still think that's the best story.
Because you'd only be 2% of the way into Metal Gear 5.
Yeah. And Metal Gear 5 is, if you ask me which game would I rather be in a desert island with, it's Metal Gear 5 every single day. I think, it probably is a much, much better game if you force me to do that. But in terms of just delivering a very good, narrative Metal Gear experience that has a real emotional gut punch to it, which Kodge, he doesn't really manage, because for everything that's fantastic about him, he has an enormous amount of weaknesses as well that he can't seem to quite rein in. And Metal Gear 3 seems to be the only one where he was able to do that. And I think it's because Metal Gear 3 is basically a tribute to what he loves, which is cheesy action movies and spy movies from the 60s. And I think that's why Metal Gear 3 is so good. I think if you look at the Metal Gear series, you can see with Metal Gear 2, he's trying to be kind of the avant-garde. He is trying to be the auteur, pushing the medium forward. With Metal Gear 3, I think he just made a game for himself. And with Metal Gear 4, I think he made a game for the fans, and that was a disaster.
Sean Ratu writes, no question. I just want to hear my name read out as I'll be listening to the episode while having root canal treatment. So I wanted to honour that request.
Isn't his name like Ruti or something as well?
Ratu. I'm pronouncing it. His Twitter name is Ratulator.
Ratu canal treatment.
So I hope you've had your name read out enough.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that, mate. I hope they've given you lots of laughing gas.
And that's all the questions we have time for.
Does root canal take like an hour and a half? He's probably been listening to this waiting.
Maybe.
You've had one, haven't you?
I had, they do it in phases. So I had one about 3 weeks ago. And they do it across 3 appointments. In the first appointment, they clean out the inside of your tooth and stick a temporary filling in it. And then the second time, they inject a bunch of crap into the root and seal that up with a temporary filling to try and heal it. And then the third appointment, which I haven't had yet, is when they put in a permanent filling or a crown, depending on how it's going. And that second appointment took about 45 minutes. And the first one would have been about 10-15. So, yeah, it could easily add up.
I was at the dentist recently, and I go there every 6 months, and this is, my, 7th time there or something. And midway through, she said, at some point you should also see the dentist. And I was like, okay, I have a question. I'm not really sure what the question is. Maybe it's, where am I?
Would you seeing the hygienist?
Yes, it turns out she was the hygienist, and actually hadn't seen the dentist in about 4 years.
Well, apparently this is a new This is turning into fucking Creighton teeth now. But like, they've
T-shirt
changed,
toothbrush.
right? When I used to go to the dentist as a kid, they used to be both the dentist and the hygienist. And at some point, without telling anybody, they turned them into two different roles.
There's been a breakup.
I don't know what it is. Maybe it's something to do with
Unions.
privatisation. Maybe the hygienists are private contractors and dentists on the NHS. I don't know what it is, but like, I don't know. Weird. Anyway, it's weird that I have to ask to have, go to the hygienist now. I have very good oral hygiene, apparently. Although I drink too much tea.
Wow. Sadly,
They can tell that from
sadly you're not porcine enough for my tastes.
Anyway. That's the end of this podcast. We're just going to stop it there. 'Cause
Yeah.
There's nowhere else to go.
Please do ask us other questions if you can.
You can do that at questions@creightoncrowbar.com. You can send them to us on Twitter. We are at Creighton Crowbar on there. You can write them on the forum, which is creightoncrowbar.com/forum. And you can follow us on Twitter, which I guess would be the same Twitter name that I just told you.
And also, if you go to the forum, you can now join our chat channel, which is listed on the forum. It's using a program called Discord, which is fucking great, and everybody should use it. It's much better than Mumble or TeamSpeak or things like that.
It's not even a program, is it? It's just a web
You
page.
can download a standalone app, which gives you a few more features, but pretty much everything is possible via the web app. It just pisses all over Skype.
Yeah. I haven't opened Skype once since I was introduced to it.
I mean, you just have to send somebody a URL and they can join your chat channel, basically. It's great. And that seems to have destroyed our forum, because everybody's now on the chat channel set up by one of our esteemed readers, Jammy. Thanks to Jammy for doing that. And it's great. So join that and talk on it.
And back us via Patreon at patreon.com/Creighton Crowbar.
You don't have to, but it's much appreciated.
Yeah. It gets you nothing. Not even priority on question answering.
That was a core proponent of our monetization strategy. It was that people should receive nothing in exchange for supporting us.
But this rum is tasty.
So thanks for that.
And you can follow us on Twitter individually. I am Pentadact, Pentadact.
I am at Rich Stanton, I think.
That's
I think
correct.
it's Rich Stanton.
Yeah, pretty sure that's right.
RICHSTANTON.
Thanks for coming on, Rich.
You're very welcome.
have
I'd
you.
do it any time.
Wow. We may abuse that generosity too much.
Yeah, maybe I was a bit too
Yeah, you might have to think
Yeah.
about the future
Actually,
of your
I've not had a
trials.
very good time this evening. Got a bit of a stomachache.
I am at Gonnas, Gonnas.
And I'm at Marsh Davis, which is Davies. I wish I could say that backwards, so I could say, to be this, thanks for everybody takes.
I actually
Maybe in the web file you could just flip that and insert it.
Oh yeah.
I watched a documentary on George Martin the other night, the EMI producer who most famously produced the Beatles, but produced tons of bands. And he said the biggest moment in the Beatles' career was when they got in a new machine that could play them backwards, and he played Lennon a bit of his voice backwards, sped up, and Lennon was like, "What's that?" And he says, "It's you, but backwards." Yeah. And they just really Beatles song from that point on has some sort of kind of reversed element in it.
No way, really?
Yeah. And obviously, when you get to songs like "Tomorrow Never Knows," the whole thing's backwards.
Okay, well, here's a challenge for you, Graham. When you edit this, I'm going to say something. You're going to have to reverse the correct bit of it and insert it. So, to be this, thanks for listening, everybody. Takes here of your